Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our sixth event in the second series of webinars, co-hosted by the Department of Buildings and ASHRAE New York City. We have a few more events planned for the next couple of weeks, and the schedule is published on ashraeny.org. If you visit the website, you can click on the calendar view for a good idea of the schedule. I believe there will be one or more or two more events added on top of what's already on the calendar. As always, we will be sending email reminders to keep everyone up to date on the event development. And speaking of which, let me just highlight the next webinar, which is planned for upcoming Thursday, March 20th, and it will start at 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. The DOB will present on how to navigate the Local Law 97 reporting portal for compliance with Local Law 88. So it's on this upcoming Thursday. And today's webinar will also last approximately 1 hour, and the video recording will be available for future viewing as always. It will be posted on both ASHRAE and the DOB websites. You can access previous recordings and slides from the link shared in the chat or by going to ashraeny.org and clicking on events. After that, at the top of the page, you will see DOB Sustainability Series. So that's where you can access all the materials, and you can also find their today's presentation. I'm looking at the handout section, but I can't see the PDF yet, so maybe it has to update. Give us a moment, please. And it will be shown, or maybe you can see it already at the bottom of the GoToWebinar panel. And just a few more housekeeping items for today's event. Everyone except for the speakers is in listening mode only. However, as always, we would like to encourage everyone to ask questions in the chat window, and you can find it also at the bottom of the control panel for this webinar, for GoToWebinar. We have again a very strong DOB team, and they will be answering all questions during the webinar. But if any questions won't be answered, or if for any reason your chat doesn't work, you can email your questions to ghgemissions@buildingsnyc.gov, and this is for general questions. And there is another email for questions related to BEAM. It's beam_ll97@buildings.nyc.gov, and we will post these emails in the chat in a moment. And lastly, before I introduce our speakers, I just wanted to mention that we will be sharing a link to the presentation evaluation survey. So please feel free to share your feedback by filling out a brief survey at the end of this webinar. So finally, please allow me to introduce our speakers. All are with the Department of Buildings, and we have Julia Fredenburg, Andrew McLean, and Bev Golub. And so again, welcome everyone, and I'm going to pass it over to Beth. Hi, Beth.
Hi, Luke. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As Luke just described, this is our sixth session on the reporting process for Local Law 97, and including new processes for benchmarking and Local Law 88 compliance. Okay, next slide. I'm Beth Golub. I'm the Director of Sustainability Policy and Legal Affairs at the Department of Buildings. My colleagues Julia Fredenberg and Andrew McLean will talk to you today about penalty mitigation for Article 320 buildings and CBL disputes. And again, we thank you for joining us. And as we have been doing over these sessions, we will be answering questions in the chat throughout the webinar. We encourage you to listen to the presentation, as the webinar does contain a lot of information, and oftentimes a question that might be asked in the chat will be covered in later slides. Next slide. Okay, great. So some foundational information that we've been going over so far. For Local Law 97, the deadline for submitting reports is May 1st, with a grace period until June 30th, and every building can apply for an extension, which extends the deadline to August 29th. There are no prerequisites for that extension application per the service notice that DOB released earlier in March. If a building is subject to both Local Law 97 and Local Law 88 this year, those submissions can be treated as one deadline. So if the Local Law 97 deadline is extended, the Local Law 88 deadline would also be following that 97 extension deadline. However, if a building is subject to Local Law 88 this year, but not Local Law 97, the deadline is May 1st with a grace period to June 30th. There is no extension opportunity. And as a reminder, the Local Law 84 benchmarking deadline is May 1st. Next slide. Okay, and the new filing process that we've been reiterating in these webinars is that for Local Law 97 and Local Law 88, a building must start in DOB now by paying the filing fee. And when paying that filing fee, the building will submit contact information for the building owner and owner's representative, and the owner's representative may be the building's service provider. When the building provides the contact information for the owner and owner's representative and receives the payment confirmation code, it will be those pieces of information that are used to connect data across DOB Now, ESPM, and Beam. Once an account has been set up in Beam, additional providers can be added to the Beam account. And because this is the process by which the account has to be set up, and this is the information that's used to connect the information, if a building has different service providers for Local Law 97, Local Law 88, and Local Law 84, those service providers will need to communicate and collaborate on this submission process. We'll go through the information we have described for today about Article 320 penalty mitigation and CBL disputes. We will answer questions in the chat. And as a reminder, when the webinar series is complete, DOB will be publishing an FAQ that covers all of the topics covered in all of the webinars. So look out for that. Okay, next slide. And I will pass it over to Julia Fredenberg.
Thanks, Beth. So now we're going to talk about penalty mitigation for Article 320 buildings. And this is a two-step process. So the first step is to pay your DOB Now filing fee and get your payment confirmation number. Then you'll go over to the Beam reporting portal and use that payment confirmation number to apply for your penalty mitigation. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so for penalty mitigation for Article 320 buildings, we're going to talk about good faith efforts, and then in the more rare circumstance, unexpected or unforeseeable events. And next slide, please. So the first step is that you'll go to DOB Now And the owner's representative, and the service provider, the RDP or the RCX agent, email addresses must be provided in the DOB Now filing fee process. And you're going to need those 3 email addresses because that's the only way you're going to be able to access your building profile in the BEAM reporting portal. So you might be able to make an account in BEAM without submitting the DOB Now filing fee and putting in those emails, but your building's information will not be connected and you won't be able to see it in BEAM. Again, the BEAM account must be created using one of those 3 email addresses that you put into DOB Now, the owner's representative, or service provider. And just something to remember, the DOB Now filing fee payment information, you'll submit that, and then that information is transferred to the BEAM reporting portal on a nightly basis. So this is at least a 2-day process. Don't expect to do it in 1 day. So make sure you give yourself enough time to complete that process. Okay, and next slide. Okay, so now you're at the DOB Now login page. You'll enter your NYC ID email address and choose login. If you have to create a new NYC ID account, you'll select create account, or you can use our DOB Now user guide for just an easy step-by-step instructions on how to do that. After you've logged into DOB Now, you'll see the welcome page. Hover over DOB Now Safety. You'll click Energy. And then from that submenu, you'll select Local Law 97/88 Filing Fee Payments. And next slide. So once you're on the payments dashboard, you'll select plus Local Law 97 payment. And next slide. And all of this, there's a ton of information here, and don't feel like you need to remember everything. There's a handout that we provided on the right-hand side, which is the slides of this presentation, and it'll be on the ASHRAE website, DOB website also. So we're just going to go through this. Don't worry, you don't need to remember everything. You can have a copy of this so you can browse at your convenience. Okay, so once you're in the stakeholders section, select your role as the owner or the owner's representative, and the information of the login user will auto-populate in this section. Owner information is required. To change the name or address, you'll select Manage Associate Licenses from that person icon at the top right corner of the screen. If the logged in user is an owner's representative, enter the email address associated with the NYC ID account of the owner on the Owner Information tab. The grayed out fields will auto-populate from the DOB Now profile that's associated with your NYC ID account. And then to submit a compliance report in BEAM, again, you're first going to have to pay your filing fee, create an account in BEAM using one of those 3 email addresses that you've provided here, the owner's representative, or the service provider. And only those emails will allow you access to your building profile in BEAM. And you'll have to add all those 3 email addresses on this screen here. Once you're in BEAM, you can add additional contacts. So you won't be limited to those 3 once you're in BEAM. Okay, and next slide, please. Okay, so for fee exempt owners, under the owner information, you'll select owner type, and the following owner types are fee exempt: buildings owned by a nonprofit corporation that is used exclusively for educational, charitable, and or religious purposes, or buildings that are owned by federal, state, city, or foreign government. So if you are a fee exempt owner type, you're still going to have to go through this process. You won't be paying the fee, but you're still going to need to get the payment confirmation number that you're going to have to enter into the BEAM reporting portal. If you're selected fee exempt owner type, then you'll have to provide documentation of this in the BEAM reporting portal, and you can do that by going to the Department of Finance website. The property information there must indicate that the tentative or final assessment roll assessed value is 0. Once you're on the website, you can print off proof of that exemption, and you can upload that into the BEAM portal when you apply for penalty mitigation. Okay, next slide. Okay, so once you're on the transaction information page, you'll select Article 320, and then you'll select yes when asked whether you'll be filing a compliance report for Local 987 reporting portal, and you'll select 2024 as your report year. Okay, great. And then for Article 320 penalty mitigation, you'll select one of the two following. Good faith efforts report. That's probably the most likely thing that you're going to choose. And then in more rare circumstances, you can choose unexpected or unforeseeable event. Slide. And then in the property information, you'll select, you'll enter your borough, block, and lot to add your bin, and you'll select search and add. Okay, once you see your building identification number or your bin pop-up window, you'll select the boxes next to your bin where the filing fee will be applied, and you'll choose select and add. Okay, great. And then the property information will be listed. You'll see that in this grid here under the search and add button, and can be removed by selecting the trash icon. If selections are changed in the transaction information section after an address has been added, the system will remove the address and will need to be re-entered. Then you'll select yes to confirm your bins or single bin has either a single owner or the property is a co-op or condo. If you have a related payment confirmation number, you can enter that in under here. And then you'll choose proceed to pay. Okay, now you're in the payment confirmation screen. You'll see a filing fee amount associated with the type of penalty mitigation that you chose, either good faith effort or unexpected or unforeseeable event. And then you'll click pay now. And then next slide. Okay, so after you've submitted your payment in CityPay, you'll get receipt details showing a receipt number. This is not the number that you're looking for. You are looking for the payment confirmation number. And if you're paying by credit card, PayPal, or Venmo, you'll see a notification with that payment notification number, and you'll also get an email. Now, the payment confirmation number is going to be the one that you want to keep, and you'll use that again in the BEAM reporting portal to to apply for your penalty mitigation. Now, if you're paying by e-check, that process can take longer. So just something to keep in mind. For payments by e-check, the status of the transaction will change to pending payment verification, and the payment confirmation number will be sent to you by email when the payment clears. So that can take up to 10 business days. So just something to keep in mind. Your data won't come over to BEAM until that payment clears and the status on DOB now no longer says pending, and you have that really important payment confirmation number. Okay, and then next slide, great. Okay, so we've done the first step. We've gotten our DOB now filing fee payment confirmation number, and we're ready to bring that over to the BEAM reporting portal. So we're going to talk about applying for penalty mitigation for, again, good faith efforts, and then in the more less likely scenario, unexpected or unforeseeable events. Next slide. So for penalty mitigation, if you're an owner of a covered building, that's Article 320, and you're unable to demonstrate compliance with annual GHG emissions limits, you can demonstrate qualification for a mitigated penalty or immediate resolution by providing certain documentation showing that the owner can demonstrate they're taking an action towards compliance by showing their good faith efforts for or unexpected or unforeseen circumstance that has damaged the building, making compliance impossible. So we're going to talk about how to apply for penalty mitigation by filling out the penalty mitigation for Article 320 ticket in BEAM, and then the documentation that you're going to need to do that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so when you're in BEAM, you'll go to the number 8, ticket number 8, local law 97, penalty mitigation, Article 320 in the help desk. Okay, great. And again, you'll have access to all of these slides later, so don't feel like you need to like commit this to memory. So once you're on the local law 97 penalty mitigation Article 320 ticket, you're going to need to have your building address, your BBL, your BIN. You'll have to upload the applicable supporting documentation, and you'll need confirmation of a registered design professional attestation and upload of that attestation documentation. You'll also need that DOB now payment confirmation number that we talked about earlier in the presentation. This is where you're going to use it. Okay, and next slide. Okay, so once you're on the penalty mitigation ticket for Article 320, you'll enter your building address, you'll enter your BBL, and that needs to be a 10-digit numerical only, so no letters, no spaces, no dashes, and then you'll also enter your building identification number, your BIN, and that needs to be 7 numerical digits. Again, no letters, no spaces, no dashes, just 7 numbers. Okay, great. So on this ticket, there's 2 options to choose from. There's good faith efforts, and then in the less common situation, unexpected or unforeseeable events. Okay, great. And okay, so let's start off with good faith efforts. To show good faith efforts, you'll have to show that the building owner is actively planned for and taking concrete steps towards reducing emissions. You'll have to have evidence of such planning and actions demonstrating that the owner is acting in good faith to meet the intent of Local Law 97. There are 3 prerequisites. In addition, there's some other documentation needed as well, but you're going to need your Local Law 97 emissions report, Local Law 84 benchmarking report, and then your Local Law 88 lighting and upgrades and sub-metering report. Okay, great. And next slide, please. Okay, for good faith efforts, so on the left-hand side, these are all of the reports that I just mentioned, and then on the right-hand side, you'll need to do one of these, either a decarbonization plan, or we'll have to demonstrate one of these. Complete application for the work, building out electrification readiness, previous compliance with emissions limits, critical facility, or 320.7 adjustment application. We'll have a whole webinar about 320.7 adjustment application in the next few weeks. Okay, great. And there's always, so we have this webinar, but we also have another really excellent resource about good faith efforts and these penalty mitigations, which is the Article 320 guide. So that's something that's on the DOB website and maybe something that we can put in the chat here, the Article 320 guide. That's just a great resource that kind of like can go hand in hand with the webinar. So once you're in, let's go back one slide, sorry. Okay. So once you're in the penalty mitigation ticket, you've chosen good faith efforts, and then you'll select all of the reports that you've completed. So 97, a Local Law 84, and then Local Law 88. Okay, great. Next slide. Okay. So once you've selected good faith efforts, you'll have to choose a way that you are, your plans for demonstrating the good faith efforts. So the first one is submit a decarbonization plan. You can demonstrate that work is underway, or you're waiting on utility for more power, or the building is a critical facility. Okay, next slide. Great. Okay. So if you've chosen to submit a decarbonization plan, you'll have to provide documentation showing an energy audit, inventory of major equipment, list of alterations needed for compliance, including a timeline for the work, including estimated emissions reductions, and a financing plan. And then all of those documents must be submitted as combined and submitted as one document. And you'll upload those on the penalty mitigation ticket by doing that choose file. Okay, so that's one option is a decarbonization plan, or you can demonstrate that work is underway. The documentation that you'll need for that is evidence of general alteration work is underway to reduce emissions for work requiring a department issued permit. This can be comprised of department approved plans. For work not requiring a department issued permit, this can be comprised of paid invoices, signed contracts with service providers. So all forms of evidence must show an appropriate job scope and description. You'll have to have a project completion timeline, calculations of projected reductions based on the work, and a signed contract with a provider for that work. And again, you'll have to combine those documents into one for the upload. Okay, and next file, or next slide. Okay, the next option you can choose is waiting on utility for more power, and the documentation that you'll need is a department approved electrical filing showing appropriate project scope, and also certification from an electrical utility that they have accepted the increased load request, and anticipated timeline for completion. Again, you'll have to combine those into one file for the upload. And next slide. And another option is to show that the building is a critical facility, and you'll need documentation showing that there is a description demonstrating how penalty payment would negatively impact a critical facility's ability to provide services. Okay, great. And next slide. And you'll have to confirm that the report has been reviewed by a registered design professional, and you'll check that box, and you'll enter the license number for that RDP. Then you'll upload an attestation by that RDP, and there you can find the link to that on the penalty mitigation ticket. And again, you can find more information about good faith efforts on the 320 guide on the DOB website. Okay, next slide. Okay, so in much more rare circumstances, you'll choose unexpected or unforeseeable event. You can choose from hurricane damage, severe flooding, fire, or other, and then the documentation that you'll need can include photographs demonstrating the nature and extent of the damage, and or a description of how the damage precluded compliance in the calendar year. Okay, next slide. Okay, so on that penalty mitigation ticket in Beam, you'll see the place to enter. It's at the end. Enter your DOB Now payment confirmation number, and you'll take it from DOB Now where we did in step 1. You got your payment confirmation number, and you'll enter that here. Once you've entered that in, we can go to the next slide. And you can submit ticket, and you are set. So that's how you apply for penalty mitigation. You start out in DOB Now, pay your filing fee, get your payment confirmation number, then you'll come back over to Beam, and you'll enter that information in the penalty mitigation ticket for Article 320. And again, take a look at the DOB Now 320 filing guide for it really gets into the nitty-gritty on that. And next slide. Okay, now Andrew's going to talk about CBL disputes. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Julia. Hi, everyone. As Julia said, I'm going to talk about the covered buildings list disputes and also the ways in which different buildings can be identified and how that can fit into the different systems for DOB, local compliance. I'm also going to be changing the slides live, so excuse me as I move back and forth across my screen. So we're going to start by talking about how to identify your building. And so in the covered buildings list, and then on the platforms that we've been talking about today, buildings will be identified in slightly different ways. This is because the covered buildings list identifies buildings at the lot level, the building lot level, whereas the platforms identify buildings at the individual building level. So the building address on the covered buildings list is going to be the address that is used by the Department of Finance in its records regarding the whole lot, the whole BBL, and that comprises multiple buildings. On the other hand, when you're seeking to comply on behalf of a building in these platforms, as mentioned already, you're looking to comply at the individual building level. So the building address will be different. On the CBL, it'll be the Department of Finance's address for the whole lot, whereas you need to use your specific building address that is associated with your building. On the other hand, the BBL will be the same in both. So the BBL on the covered buildings list will be the same BBL as the BBL you're using to refer to your building on the platforms. Bins may be different. So the covered buildings list includes historical records of bins that may be obsolete, so will not need to be complied for on behalf of, whereas when you are seeking to comply for your building, you need to use the correct bin, the appropriate bin that can be found on BIS. So just to reiterate the main difference, the covered buildings list is at the lot level, whereas all of the compliance is at the specific building level, and so some details may be different. So BBLs, as you may know, are 10-digit numbers, and those digits refer to 3 different things: the borough, which is 1 digit, the block, which is 5 digits, and the lot, which is 4 digits. If you don't know your 10-digit, but you have 3 different digits, you can make sure that you get to 10 digits by adding as many zeros as needed to get up to 5 digits at the beginning of your block number, and then the same to get to 4 digits for your lot number. So hence you see we've added 1 0 because we had a 4-digit block number, and 3 zeros because we had a 1-digit lot number. Condos have a slightly different setup where they will have a billing BBL, which you can tell because it ends 7501, 7502, or something higher than that. That's the last 4 digits. And then the individual units within that condo will also have their own 10-digit numbers that DOF uses that will end 1001, 1002, or 201, 2002. These are different, and for purposes of Local Law 97, you need to use the billing BBL, which ends 7501. Addresses, as discussed, may be different at the CBL to when you're seeking to comply. So make sure that you go and just ensure that you are getting the right address. So that will be the one that will be on BIS. In this case, we can see 6917. There's a range of house numbers, but we're going to use 6917 for the individual building, and then that's paired with that specific bin. As I mentioned, bins on the covered buildings list, there'll be multiple bins in some cases on a single lot, and this may be because there are multiple buildings, and hence there will be different bins for these different buildings, but there may also be some historical bins or obsolete bins that DOB has put on the CBL. We will not be issuing any penalties associated with historical or obsolete bins, but you need to identify the appropriate bin for your building when you seek to comply. And you can do that on BIS. So here's a screenshot of the covered buildings list. At the bottom, you can see on the left, there's the 10-digit BBL. Then there is one or more 7-digit bins. Then there's the address. And then on the right, there are the different compliance pathways. These are the different ways in which buildings with different conditions need to comply with local law 97. It's important to be aware that this covered buildings list, which tends to be published annually, is compiled using data shared by partner agencies from across the city and the state. And that's how we determine the Department of Buildings' best view of that building's compliance pathway. However, those circumstances can change. For example, when new information is shared with the department by a professional or through documentation being shared, or the building circumstances could change, for example, the end of a contract. And both of those things can change a building's compliance pathway. So the covered buildings list is a reference for building owners to consider their compliance pathway, but building owners should also be working with legal representatives and RDPs to make sure that that reference is correct. And if they think it isn't correct, should dispute that compliance pathway with the Department of Buildings. And we're going to be talking about that. So as I've said, there could be multiple bins on a lot, on a BBL. And when this reflects that there are multiple buildings, that highlights an issue for the Department of Buildings, which is that we do not know which compliance pathway applies to which bin. And all of the information that has been shared with the Department of Buildings is at the lot level, not the bin level, which means that it is up to building owners, when there is more than one bin on a lot, to confirm that compliance pathway with the Department of Buildings. So here we can see that in the red box, there's 2 different buildings with 2 different compliance pathways. The Department of Buildings doesn't know which pathway applies to which. So both of those building owners should submit a dispute with the Department of Buildings to confirm their compliance pathway based on their best information on that building. So if the building on a lot with multiple buildings on it wants to comply with any pathway other than Article 0, Article 320, beginning 2024, they should dispute that with the Department of Buildings. You can find more information on covered buildings and on the CBL at the DOB's website, which is linked here. And also you can find the matrix. The matrix is a great resource. It has all of the different compliance pathways, the different reasons that a building may be on a compliance pathway, and we're calling those programs, the compliance requirements for those pathways, and then the documentation that is required to evidence that a building is on a particular pathway. So just to recap this section, there are 2 main reasons to dispute your building's compliance pathway. One is if you look at the covered buildings list and you disagree with the compliance pathway that the DOB has identified for that building, dispute it. And the other is if there are multiple buildings on the lot and you think that your building should comply with any compliance pathway other than Article 320 beginning 2024. Again, dispute, and we will talk about how to do that. So the existing compliance pathway dispute process is from the GHG emissions email address, ghgemissions@buildings.nyc.gov. That is no longer the way to do it. As of last week, this slide is now slightly out of date. As of last week, you must submit the ticket through BEAM, and we're going to go through how to do that. The process after it's been submitted is the same. The Department of Buildings will review the dispute and the documentation that's been supplied, request any more documentation that is needed, and then we'll share the dispute with partner agencies for confirmation. This can take weeks. The Department of Buildings will then determine the appropriate compliance pathway for the building, inform the applicant, and update internal records. And that will mean that the next published covered buildings list should reflect this updated information. However, some information that is shared with us does not go on forever. For example, a rent regulated unit or building, the documentation lasts for a year, so will have to be resubmitted the following year. it's worth noting that a number of disputes have been already submitted by email. The Department of Buildings is working to complete those as quickly as possible. However, if a dispute isn't resolved by the time that the compliance is due, the owner should not wait for the dispute to be resolved by the Department of Buildings before submitting the report. The owner should just submit the report along the compliance pathway that the owner believes is the correct one, and that will be fine. If there is an issue, if the Department of Buildings disagrees with the compliance pathway that the building owner has chosen, we will work with the building owner to help the building comply with the correct compliance pathway. So let's talk about the new dispute ticket on Beam. So as with the other tickets, so you'll go to Help Desk, you'll go to New Ticket on the left, and then you'll click the first ticket. That's Local Law 97 Covered Building List Disputes. It's important to note that for this ticket only, you do not need a Beam account or a DOB Now payment confirmation to submit a disputes ticket. Anybody can do this before making an account or paying anything. So once you've got to the ticket, you'll see the different information that it is prompting you to input. So it'll be first the building identification, then a series of questions about the nature of the dispute, and then the specific documentation that's needed. And we're going to go through these different types of disputes. It will include Article 320 disputes, but we'll also cover some other scenarios. So at the beginning, it'll ask for your building address, your BBL, your bin, and then any other bins. So as discussed, the building address needs to be the address that is specific to the building, not the lot, the building, and you can find that on BIS. Then there's the BBL, which you can find on the CBL. That'll be the same number, 10 digits, remember, for the BBL. Then the building identification number, as found on BIS, 7 digits. And any other bins covered by this dispute. And you can submit a dispute covering multiple bins only when the documentation that you're going to supply covers multiple buildings at once. For example, it's a contract that lists separate buildings within it. You can submit one dispute that covers all the buildings in that contract. If you have separate documentation for each different building, you have to do separate dispute tickets. So then it'll ask you what your dispute is about. And so there'll be 3 different types. One is when your building is on the CBL and you think it shouldn't be. So it shouldn't be a covered building under Local Law 97. The second is when you want to change its compliance pathway under Local Law 97. And then the third is when it isn't on the covered buildings list, but you think it should be subject to Local Law 97. So we're going to start with 1. So this is when you think it shouldn't be subject to Local Law 97. There are a number of reasons that you may think a building shouldn't be subject to Local Law 97. We're going to cover them all at a very high level, but this presentation does include more detail about that you'll be able to go through later at your leisure. So the first option is the most common one, and this is when you think the building isn't big enough to be covered by Local Law 97. The Department of Buildings uses the Department of Finance's records to identify buildings that are subject to Local Law 97. So to dispute this, you need to complete a dispute with the Department of Finance at the address here, sustainablebuildings@finance.nyc.gov. You need to get them to confirm your dispute, and then you can submit a dispute here, sharing the confirmation by email, the email confirmation the Department of Finance will have given you, sharing that with us. Without that confirmation, proof that the Department of Finance records have changed regarding your building, we cannot change your building, whether your building is subject to Local Law 97. Another reason is if your building is a utility. So you need to share an email from the utility confirming that this building is a utility. Another option is if it's a garden style apartment. I won't go through all of the requirements here, but you can find them here if needed. Also, if a building is a city building or a nature building, you've got to supply proof in the form of a regulatory agreement or an email from NYCHA. If your building has been demolished, we need the demolition permit. And if it's a new building and so hasn't been around long enough to actually emit or be around for the full year to emit emissions, you need to submit the work permit or the first certificate of occupation or occupancy. If the ownership of the building has changed and in such a way that means it is no longer a covered building, you will need to supply a range of different pieces of documentation that we're not going to go through here. And those are the different ways in which you can prove that your building shouldn't be subject to Local Law 97. And this, you can go back through these slides to check on the documentation needed. So now we're going to talk about why your building may want to change or why you may want to change your building's compliance pathway. So here we have the three different options. There's Article 320 beginning in 2026. So that's compliance pathway 1. That's a delay in the case of when your building has at least one, but fewer than 35% of the units are rent regulated. Then there's compliance pathway 2, Article 320 beginning in 2035. That's when it has at least one unit that is income restricted. And then there's Article 321, one-time compliance. We're not going to cover this in detail today, but those are various forms of affordability. So if you're choosing Article 320 beginning in 2026, you select that and then you confirm that you understand the documentation requirements, which will appear below. And we'll just go through here. So even separate to the documentation requirements, you can speed up the processing of your disputes by supplying some information that will help us with the dispute. So in this case, when you want to show us that your building contains rent stabilized units, you can input the building registration number, the most recent year of registration with DHCR, the number of rent stabilized units in the building, and the number of dwelling units in the building. These should be on the documentation that you will supply separately, but inputting it here will make it easier for us to process this dispute. Once you've done that, you can submit an annual registration summary. We need this to verify your building is rent stabilized. If your building contains rent controlled units and you need to prove that to us, then we need a letter from a lawyer confirming that of the dwelling units in the building, one or more units, but less than 35% of the dwelling units are rent regulated, which is rent controlled or rent stabilized. So rent controlled and rent stabilized are different forms of rent regulation, and data on those is stored in different ways, and so we need different forms of documentation around them. If you select that your building should be subject to Article 320 beginning in 2035, then a new set of documentation requirements will appear on the page, and you need to confirm that you understand them. And then it will ask you to select the reason that your building should be subject to this pathway, because there are multiple reasons that a building could be subject to this pathway. And so those are, it's a Mitchell-Lama building, it's income restricted and has tax exemptions, or it's income restricted through agreement with HPD. So if it's a Mitchell-Lama building, you need to submit a certification of incorporation certified by the state. If it is an income restricted tax exemption building, and you can see the different ways in which it may be, the different exemption codes that such a building may get, then you need to provide a regulatory agreement or restrictive declaration pursuant to a tax exemption. And you can do that through a property tax bill with proof of the exemption. If your building is income restricted through HPD, you need to share an active regulatory agreement or restricted declaration. And this agreement needs to specify the building and it needs to be active. So we need a date and we need reference to your building in the documentation that you share. we're not going to go into detail here because we covered that in last week's presentation, but you can also select Article 321, one-time compliance, and it will prompt you with the correct information or documentation to supply. The final type of dispute that you can do on this ticket is when a building isn't listed on the CBL and you think it should be. Again, this is primarily going to be about the size of the building, where perhaps you disagree with the Department of Finance regarding your building size. And again, to prove that the Department of Finance has changed its records regarding your building, you need to email us, you need to supply to us documentation in the form of an email confirmation from the Department of Finance confirming your dispute with them. At the end of any of these types of disputes on this ticket, you will have a text box where you can provide an explanation of your dispute if needed. You can also upload additional documentation if you need to upload more than one piece of documentation. If you need to upload more than 5, then you should start combining them into a single PDF in the way that Julia mentioned earlier. It will be helpful if you can label files to make easier processing. And that allows us to see which file refers to what more quickly. Then at the end, you could click Submit Ticket, and we will then process the dispute as quickly as we can. And over to Beth.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Julia. And now I will take some time to just cover a few of the questions, a few of the recurring questions that we have seen popping up in the chat. So we've received a lot of questions about the historic or obsolete bins that are listed or appear on the CBL and how those should be handled. So when a compliance report is submitted, the appropriate bin for that building will be identified. Where there is a compliance report with an appropriate bin identified, other historic or obsolete bins that are associated with that same building will not receive penalties. However, we have heard the feedback about insecurity relating to these historic and obsolete bins, and so we do plan to add functionality to the CBL dispute tickets so that buildings can affirmatively confirm the appropriate bin and any historic or obsolete bins. So look out for that. Another question we've received is about when bins and or BBLs are not accurate on BIS. Please do refer to the Article 320 guide, which describes how to fix your BBL and bin. And in general, we should plug our guides, the Article 320 guide and the Article 321 filing guide, which contain a lot of information that is helpful for compliance. We've received a number of questions relating to when buildings are submitting a penalty mitigation ticket, whether that building also has to file a compliance report, and the answer is yes. That means that the building must pay for the compliance report filing fee in addition to the penalty mitigation filing fee, and both of those tickets must be submitted. We also have had some questions about when buildings encounter issues with utility data. A building should contact the utility directly to resolve those issues. And in the rare occurrence that any type of utility data issue impacts compliance with any of DOB's sustainability laws, the utility will confirm this for DOB, and the building owner will not be penalized for late data. Okay, I think those are the FAQ we received today. As you can see on this calendar, we have the Local Law 88 webinar coming on Thursday. Next Tuesday, March 25th, we have a webinar on the 320.7 adjustment. And then there will be an additional webinar added for block proration for multiple buildings in a report and how those can be handled. And then finally, we'll have a webinar on the offset program on April 1st. And so look out for more information on those. Okay, great. Back to you, Luke.
Thank you, Beth. Just to add to this schedule, I believe the 1st of April event will be hosted on our partner organization website or webinar platform. So it will be with Urban Green, and the March 28th event will be posted to our website soon if it's already not there. So please stay tuned. And again, big thank you to Beth, Julia, and Andrew for presenting for us today. As always, we will post the video recording share with everyone within the next few days. If there was any videos that you haven't received yet, you can always check for the link and for all the materials to previous presentations on ashrayny.org and on DOB websites. We should be sharing a presentation evaluation link in the chat. So please take a minute to fill it out and provide your feedback for the team, and we will leave the webinar open for another couple minutes so that you can click on all the links, download the PDF slides, and save the email addresses. And just one last reminder, we will be meeting again this upcoming Thursday at 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. And for this event, the DOB team will be presenting on how to navigate the local law 97 reporting portal in compliance with local law 88. And that's all for today. Thank you for joining us again, and have a wonderful day.